Private Jack Morrison settled his M1 Garand against his shoulder, aiming at the dark, swift current of the Moselle River. He saw no enemy, only the river's relentless pull, a force silently shaping the destiny of men he couldn't yet see. Unbeknownst to the German soldiers gathering on the opposite bank, their crossing would be an exercise in precise, fatal geometry. Jack Morrison had been molded by water long before the war. Raised in Bangor, Maine, he spent 16 years on the Penobscot River. He worked the commercial fishing nets with his father. From the age of 12, he learned to read currents in absolute darkness. He navigated solely by sound and feel, predicting the exact path of logs, debris, and fish, water depth, and object weight. He could calculate drift in his head, factoring in current speed, knowing precisely where something would end up before it got there. When Pearl Harbor drew America into the war, Morrison, then 27, enlisted in January 1942. The Army recognized his innate ability with a rifle, qualifying him as an expert marksman, and assigned him an M1 Garand, but they never asked about fishing, never inquired about rivers. He was simply a man who could shoot straight. By June 1944, he was on a ship to England, landing in France 2 weeks after D-Day. His unit, the 90th Infantry Division, pushed east, fighting their way through the summer toward the German border. By late August, they had reached the Moselle River. German forces, though retreating, were fighting with fierce determination, needing to cross the Moselle to reach their own territory. It was their last significant natural barrier. On August 22nd, Morrison's platoon took up positions along the Moselle's west bank, their mission to secure the river and prevent any German crossing attempts. The Moselle here was about 150 feet wide, its current running at a steady 4 to 5 knots. All day, Morrison studied the river, not for signs of the enemy, but for the subtle variations in its flow, eddies, faster and slower stretches, and the intricate patterns of its movement. His platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Raymond Walsh, noticed Morrison staring at the empty water. Walsh asked what he was doing. Morrison explained he was reading the current. Walsh, focused on the immediate threat, found it perplexing, but allowed Morrison to continue. Morrison simply stated that the water would tell them where the Germans would be. As 8 p.m. arrived, the platoon settled into their defensive positions. 32 men spread across 400 yards of riverbank, concealed by thick brush, with clear fields of fire across the water. The night was overcast, moonless, with visibility perhaps 50 yards. In the faint ambient starlight at 11:30 p.m., the sounds began filtering across the river. German voices and the clatter of equipment echoed. A crossing attempt was underway. Walsh gave the standard orders: wait for targets to enter the water. Shoot only when a clear shot presented itself. But Morrison had a different plan. At 11:47 p.m., the first German soldiers entered the river. 200 yards north of his position, they were barely visible, just dark shapes against the darker water, too distant for accurate night shooting by conventional means. The other Americans held their fire, waiting. Morrison, however, watched the current. The river at that point pushed southwest at 4 knots. German soldiers entering upstream would not move directly across, but would drift diagonally. He calculated 4 knots meant 6.7 feet per second, accounting for their movement in waist-deep water in precisely 12 seconds. A German entering 200 yards upstream would drift into a firing lane, 180 yards directly in front of him. Morrison aimed at the empty water 180 yards out, waited, counted to 12, and fired. The M1 Garand's report cracked across the river. A German soldier screamed and vanished beneath the surface. The river had delivered him exactly where Morrison had predicted. Morrison worked his rifle's action, aimed at the same spot. He counted to 12 again and fired. As another German drifted into his calculated zone, another hit. The other Americans were bewildered. Morrison was shooting at nothing they could see. Yet Germans were falling as Sergeant Walsh crawled over, and Morrison explained his method. He was not shooting at the Germans, but at where the current would inevitably push them. The river, he said, did the calculations. He simply pulled the trigger at the right moment. Walsh, seeing the results, told him to continue. By 12:15 a.m., Morrison had fired 14 rounds, achieving 8 confirmed kills. The screams of Germans caught in the current echoed. The initial crossing attempt faltered, and the surviving German soldiers scrambled back to the east bank, shouting in confusion and disarray, convinced they were under fire from an invisible enemy at an impossible range. At 1:20 a.m., the Germans tried again, this time 300 yards north, with perhaps 40 men. They believed the increased distance and darkness would protect them. Morrison watched the current again. This new crossing point had a faster flow, 5 knots. The river would push them southwest even more quickly. He recalculated, adjusted his aim point for the increased drift. He waited, counted to 12, and fired another hit. Then another. The Germans panicked once more, turning back. The Germans panicked once more, turning back. By 2:45 a.m., they launched a third, more complex attempt, using multiple crossing points simultaneously along a 600-yard stretch, hoping to overwhelm the American defenses. Morrison could not cover all 4 points, so he focused on the northernmost, where the current was fastest and most predictable. He eliminated 3 Germans in 90 seconds, all by shooting where the river would push them. By now, the other Americans were watching. They began to grasp Morrison's technique, adjusting their own fire to predicted drift zones. Instead of waiting for visible targets, the method spread throughout the platoon. 32 soldiers, all now firing at calculated water positions. The Moselle River transformed into a deadly trap. Germans entering the water, regardless of their starting point, drifted inexorably into preset firing zones. Caught by the current, unable to dodge, they moved precisely into the path of American rifles. By 3 a.m., the Germans had lost 23 soldiers in the water. The crossing attempts ceased. The cost had become too high. Morrison alone had personally accounted for 17 of them, simply by reading the river. At 4:30 a.m., German artillery, frustrated by their inability to cross, opened fire, shelling the American positions with mortars and 88mm guns. The barrage, random and without precise targeting, lasted 20 minutes. Morrison's platoon took cover, remaining low. When the shelling stopped, the Germans made one last desperate attempt at 5:10 a.m. First light was only 40 minutes away. They were running out of darkness. 60 soldiers plunged into the river at 2 points in a mass effort. Morrison returned to his work. The current speed hadn't changed. The flow patterns were constant. He aimed at his calculated positions, firing methodically. One shot every 12 seconds as German after German drifted into his kill zone. The entire platoon joined him, firing at preset water positions. The Germans were caught, unable to move faster than the current, unable to dodge, unable to retreat once committed. As casualties mounted, German soldiers struggled back to the east bank, dragging wounded, leaving dead to float downstream. By 5:40 a.m., the attempt had utterly failed, with 15 more Germans lost. Morrison's personal count for the night reached 27. At 6 a.m., dawn broke, revealing the river and the bodies floating downstream. German survivors on the east bank retreated inland. The night crossing attempts were over. Sergeant Walsh tallied the casualties. 39 confirmed German dead in the river. Morrison had killed 27 of them. The remaining 12 were accounted for by other platoon members. Using his current reading method, there were 0 American casualties. Word of the engagement reached division headquarters. An intelligence officer was sent to interview Morrison. The officer sought to understand how a rifleman could eliminate 27 enemy soldiers at night without seeing most of his targets. Morrison explained his 16 years as a commercial fisherman on the Penobscot, how he had learned to read currents in darkness, set nets in moving water, and calculate where the river would push everything, fish, logs, anything floating. He explained that this skill translated perfectly to combat. German soldiers wading through current became predictable targets. The river, he said, did the work. He simply shot where the math dictated they would be. The intelligence officer documented the technique, calling it current lead shooting, and sent the report up the chain of command. By September 1944, American units positioned along the Rhine and Moselle rivers were training their soldiers in Morrison's method: read the current, calculate drift, and shoot at predicted positions instead of visible targets. The technique proved particularly effective at night and in fog, where visibility was poor but river flows remained consistent. Morrison continued to serve, his unit pushing into Germany in November 1944, fighting through the severe winter and finally reaching Czechoslovakia by May 1945. His total confirmed kills reached 67, with 39 of them achieved through current reading at river crossings. He was awarded the Silver Star for the August 23rd engagement, the citation noting his exceptional marksmanship and tactical innovation under combat conditions, though it made no mention of fishing. In September 1945, Morrison returned to Maine to Bangor, to the Penobscot River. He returned to commercial fishing, the same skills that had ended the lives of 39 German soldiers now helped him catch salmon and sturgeon. He kept his M1 Garand, hanging it in his workshop, and when asked about the war, he would simply say infantry, offering no further elaboration. In 1979, a military historian researching the 90th Infantry Division's operations uncovered Sergeant Walsh's after-action report from August 23, 1944. It detailed Morrison's current lead shooting technique, the 39 German casualties, and the 0 American losses. The historian tracked down Morrison, then 64, and still fishing the Penobscot. Morrison confirmed the details, stating it was not complicated. Rivers follow physics. Current speed multiplied by duration equals drift distance. Everything in moving water adheres to that rule. Fish, debris, German soldiers. You simply calculate where they will be and shoot there. When asked what he had been thinking during those 3 hours, Morrison replied he was thinking about setting nets in the pre-dawn darkness. The same calculations, the same river reading, just different targets. Jack Morrison passed away in 1998 at the age of 83. His obituary mentioned his commercial fishing career and his military service, but not the 39 Germans, the Moselle River, or the unique technique that saved his platoon. His M1 Garand now resides in a display case at the Maine Military Museum in Augusta, its placard briefly noting his service with the 90th Infantry Division. Yet, in Army marksmanship training today, Morrison's principle of current lead shooting for river crossings is still taught. Moving water creates predictable drift, and skilled shooters can exploit this to hit targets they cannot see. It stands as a testament to how practical skills, honed far from any battlefield, can dramatically alter the course of battle, often in ways military training could never anticipate.